Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Vincent with ANAB, and we are pleased to have you a part of us today, working through a bit of what is going on with the revision of the 2659 standard in 2024. I'm joined by my colleague, Caitlin O'Connell. We together are going to work at getting you the information you need and working to manage chat so that there could be some questions and answers you may have. We'll work to have time for that, and also Caitlin will be checking that out, making sure that there could be possibly some things that she can answer in the meantime before we address things at the end of our session. We're going to go ahead and record the session. It will be available online. There are going to be some additional tools that are available to you. We have some QR codes for you, so get your cameras ready. We'll make sure that you have access to the PowerPoint, of course, as well, that has the QR codes in them so that you can get access to those resources. I see there's a hand raised already. Gretchen, before we get started, you had your hand raised. Can you unmute your phone and tell us what your question is? Not sure if that's working. You may need to just type your question in chat. So I want to go ahead and get started. We're also joined by Taran Arvaz, who is our fearless leader in 2659. So together we will all be working at trying to help get you acclimated to what's new and different in the 2024 standard. I want to say at the outset, don't worry, there's not a lot of stuff. It's just some things we think you need to be aware of. So we're going to work at that together. Let me get you the agenda and you can see where we're going. We're going to talk, first of all, a little bit about the purpose of this meeting and who it's intended for. We'll talk a little bit, just a minute, about some additional ANAB training that's available for you that might be of use depending on who you are. We'll make that clearer in a minute. And then we'll dive right into the changes. So it's the previous 2018 version that we're speaking the changes in 2024. Hopefully they'll be clear to you. We're going to put the terminology, the certificate issuers, certificate program from section 6, the certificate issuance and use from section 7, the screen, so you'll see the actual language. Different, explain all that to you. And then we'll provide some time at the end for questions and answers. We know that there can be material headed to you, in this training and PowerPoint, but there still may be some questions. So we'll provide some time for that afterwards. And again, please be sure to type any questions that you might have in the chat, and it is going to be recorded so that it will be available online, as I mentioned earlier, and there will also be some additional tools. So let me begin by saying the purpose of this training is really to give only the changes from the 2018 version. This is really designed for people who are already accredited under the ASTM 2659 standard. So there's concepts and so forth that we're kind of assuming you are already familiar with in this particular webcast. So it's really for those who have already been accredited. And so if you're not yet accredited, there's much more in-depth information that you're going to need. And it is a course that's available. It's a 2-day. There is an exciting discount available for you today. If you have participated in this, there's a discount code for you. I'll give that to you in a second. But this is really just highlighting the changes. It's not going through the whole standard. For those of you who are already accredited, you'll want to know that we do have a new guidance document. And we do have one available for you at the end of the session today also, that goes through really what the webcast is covering today, and it lists in a table format what the previous standard said, what the new standard says, and it gives a rationale, a reason for why those have been changed.
Eric, you're breaking up a little bit. I wonder if you just keep your camera off because it might save some bandwidth.
Sure. Okay.
Let's try that.
We'll try that. Okay. There is a new application for the 2659-2024 standard. Whether you're doing surveillance or you're doing a reaccreditation, even for those who are going to do submit new applications starting in September, this new application is streamlined. It is really intended to focus on the evidence, less of an explanation of what's already in writing. So a lot of the application asks for the document name that has the evidence in it, asking you what that page number is, what the paragraphs are that contain the relevant information. It's really designed to be less work for you instead of a lot of narrative descriptions, which the previous applications had. If you do not yet have a copy of the 2024 standard, this is the QR code on the ANSI web store to purchase it. This will be available again at the end of our session today. But if you want to grab the QR code now, we do recommend that you have a copy of the 2024 standard available to you. And the additional training that goes in depth to the 2024 standard in its entirety, that is a series of meetings. There's the August 6th and 7th, and then a November 12th and 13th training that's available. The coupon code is at the bottom of this screen, and it is 20% off if you do wish to take that training. And that QR code should take you to the site whereby you can then enroll and enter that coupon code. Again, this will be available at the end of the training so that you can get it again. So let's get started with what the changes are. Essentially, there are two main categories. There are some new terminology, and there are some clauses that have changes in them. The new terminology may not really seem like it's that new, but there are some new terms that are put into Section 3 of the standard. And then we'll go in depth to all the changes in the clauses within the standard in Sections 5, 6, and 7. So to begin with, the terminology in this webcast is put into the order of how they appear in 5, 6, and 7. Within Section 3, they're placed in alphabetical order, but with this presentation, it has been ordered so that as you encounter these terms in Sections 5, 6, and 7, that's how it's presented here. So policy and procedure were not previously included in the standard. Procedures weren't really requirements. That is changing. But policies were not defined either, even though they were required. So now it's clear that a policy really is this statement of what your expectations are, and the procedure is how to go about doing that. That was not previously included. We also have a new definition of needs assessment. Needs assessment was already included as a requirement in the instructional design plan, which is in Section 6, and there were some requirements for needs assessment, but now it is included as a definition, as that method by which you determine what the requirements are, what the needs are for this program, the expectations of learners and other stakeholders. And this is the foundation for creating the program's design. And as it was true before, the needs are informing, but much of what you're deciding about the program has to demonstrate alignment. And so the course foundation is really this needs assessment and is defined now. There's also a definition for items. Many of you are familiar with the term, but it's similar to what a lot of people think of in terms of the questions. But not everything is a question on an assessment. It could be a task or an instruction of some sort. So the definition of items is now included. And cut score. Cut score, you're familiar before it had a criterion referenced assessment definition in the standard. That has been replaced by the cut score and then a further illumination with this bullet about what a criterion reference cut score is. So this is not a new requirement. It is just being clearer about what is meant. So cut scores, of course, can be determined through criterion reference cut score studies, which is a requirement of this standard. But those studies could be data-driven or judgment-driven process, and we'll speak about that as we encounter it in the standard today. But those are new definitions. Those are the only new terms that are included in section 3. So we're going to move now into the actual clauses in sections 5, 6, and 7. And we've used kind of a color code to illustrate that some of these things are just clarifying changes. They're simplifying language or they're adding some explanation. They're really not anything substantively new. Anything highlighted in green is new. It could be an addition or some modification to what existed before. It's possible that there could be things that have been moved around and they were previously in one area and now they're in a different area, and that might be coded as a substantive change. And if you see this rather kind of purple colored highlight, that means that this section has both a clarifying and a substantive change. So you can see that many of the sections, there's 9 of them that have both clarifying and substantive changes. But most of the substantive things are not really that earth-shattering or that different. And the clarifying ones are really just meant to clean things up a bit, make it a little bit easier to navigate through the standard. So let's go into each one of these. You're going to see the actual text from the 24 language on the screen, and then you'll see the color coding. Green is substantive change, yellow is clarifying change, and we'll go through them. Please, if you have questions, you can type them in chat and we will address them at the end of the session today. Okay, so the first standard that has any change to it is under the advisory group, which is standard 5142. So if you see text on the screen that there's no highlighting on, it's there because it's not been changed, but it's just a part of that standard. So in 5142, a clarifying change is that instructional design, it used to say instructional design plan. It's just instructional design is a part of what the advisory group needs to be paying attention to. And now they are also responsible for weighing in on the assessment security for the summative assessment. So that was not previously part of the advisory group responsibility for input. While security was already a part of your requirements, it was not put in with the advisory group's responsibility for input. So that's why it's highlighted in green. That will now be expected. The next change is in standard 5.2, and these are just these clarifying changes. This is in relationship to the management system. And the intent here is to be clear that a management system is kind of covering the entirety of the program, and that you need to have your management system documented. Most of all of you have already documented your policies. Some of you have procedures that are documented, but it's clearer here that these in the management system that it must be documented. And then note 1 is added as an assistance to try and help clarify here that the how you go about organizing needs to also include quality procedures as an important element. The quality part, which is kind of the objectives of your program. So down here at the bottom, next to the last sentence, your documents need to include the objectives. You previously had objectives in program evaluation. That is now the objectives for the program itself, for the entire management of it, needs to be a part of management system. And you might remember things like quality, effectiveness, and value in program evaluation. But the overall objectives for the management system need to be included now. And here with included with management. And also all the policies. Previously, there weren't the number of procedures that will now be required. And I'm going to go into that next. So some things have been divided up as policies and now procedures, not just policies. I'll be clear about that in a second. And 5212 is just saying that the procedures, which used to all be incorporated under policies, procedures are a part of management system, and I'm going to make clear to you which ones require policies and which require procedures. So here we go, 5213. These are the required policies for accredited programs under 2659. The first 3 are not new. You will notice that the certificate program design plan is not included here under documentation. The CPIDP is not included in section 5 anymore. The CPIDP, the certificate program plan, is in section 6, and the definition in section 3, it's 3.1.9, does make clear that the plan is a document, and it is the foundation of everything that's in section 6. So it's not here under 5213 anymore, but it is the foundation of what's a part of section 6 with the design and implementation and evaluation of the program. What is new is number 4. And that is because, of course, the preponderance of development with artificial intelligence, that there needs to be policies regarding technology-enabled automation that includes artificial intelligence. That was not previously a part of Section 5. It's now in the policies. So this is the policies are those stated intentions, goals, and then we have moved many things that were policies into procedures. 5214 has many of the things where you previously had policies, they are now procedures. If they're not highlighted, they were your previous policies. The highlighted ones really were just movements in some way from other things in the standard. So number 2, designation, issuance, and use. So the issuance of designation was in section 7 before. That's now actually a procedure, and it needs to be in section 5214 as part of your management system. In number 7, identity verification, that was already a part of this standard, but it's been moved so that it's clearer here because this is the set of procedures required. Previously, financial controls, number 10, was already included under the finance area, but now the financial controls are just moved more appropriately under this set of procedures. And then your accommodations procedures. These were not previously included in the standard. You do have to have procedures for accommodations covered as part of your management system. But they've been grouped together, making it a little bit more logical. This note number 2, has been added. And really what it's saying is that everything that's listed as a required policy or procedure, you must have something in writing about it. The example here is if, for example, you do not issue a designation, that does not mean you do not have to have a procedure. It means that you must have a statement of procedure that says that no designation will be granted. So if the standard says you must have a policy or you must have a procedure, it means you still have to have something in writing, and you should indicate if in some way that that procedure does not apply to your program. The example is in note 2. Okay, moving right along with management review. Most of you are familiar, of course, with management review. But number 8 is new. This coincides with what I had previously told you about documentation, and that is that you have to have objectives for the program. So management review then has to address the progress toward those objectives. Are you meeting them, not meeting them? Is it satisfactory to you? What are you going to do about it? The progress towards your objectives means you got to have objectives and indicate what those are. And then in management review, you are going to evaluate the progress. So all of the elements listed on the screen, 9 now, are a part of each management review. And as you recall, we do assume that management review happens at least once a year. A new change in personnel that may already be handled by many of you in some way or other is very clear about making sure employees, not just contractors, we had this language similar to contractors and outsourcing, but now in personnel it's made very clear that there must be contracts or agreements with personnel. It's regarding the assurance of confidentiality, impartiality, and security of assessment materials. And this note in 537, well, the parenthetical note, is that impartiality is a little bit bigger of a space than just conflict of interest. Maintaining impartiality as a whole is required now by the standard for personnel. So you might handle this in a variety of ways, but the assessor is going to be looking for where is the contract or agreement with the employee addressing each of these 3 components in 537: confidentiality, impartiality, and security of assessment materials. Moving on to financial management. These are not substantive changes. They are here for clarifications and help to provide examples. So note 4, these are examples of the kinds of documentation assessors would be looking for to show evidence of financial stability. The standard's not recreating what these documents are in the financial world. These kinds of documents already are clearly understood to be examples of financial reports, but they've given some examples here, like a balance sheet or an income statement. You might want to note the standard does not require an audit, so it does not have to have a financial audit in order to create these documents. We will recognize them if they are not audited. And then in 5412, this is about financial controls. Financial controls have to be implemented. You'll remember that in the management system, there have to be procedures of financial controls. And in 5412, this is just giving some examples of the kinds of things that are financial controls, like reconciliation of bank statements, designating who's a signer for checks and how those are monitored and implemented. So these are just clarifications. Moving on to outsourcing and commercial support. The change that's first highlighted here is in impartiality. Previously, it said conflict of interest. It's recognizing that the issues of impartiality are a little bit larger than just conflict of interest. So outsourcing commercial support does require now impartiality language in the agreement, as well as security of summative assessment materials. So all of the agreements with folks who have any interaction with the program need to have these three things addressed. Just like for employees, outsourced contracted parties have to have this kind of language in the agreements. And before, with outsourcing commercial support, it was clear that you can't outsource the decisions regarding this program. You'll remember that requirements relate to attendance in the majority or the full portion of the training, and there must be a passing score, at least a passing score or higher on the summative assessment. Well, this is just clarifying that that can't be outsourced, establishing those requirements and determining whether or not they've been met by the learner. So it's just slightly revised wording. Intent and so forth is the same. And then note 6 is here because of the fact that sometimes after, for example, a summative assessment has been met, or someone has met the passing score or higher, that there's an automated scoring and delivery of the certificate. The note is just saying that automating something doesn't mean that it has been an outsourced decision. As long as the program itself is in control of how that operates and it meets their requirements, then that's satisfactory. But just because you automate part of it doesn't mean it's not still under your control per se. So just clarifications. We're moving on to section 6. So this is the instructional design plan, which I mentioned before, used to be under a required policy that's documented, but the instructional design plan here, according to the definition of the standard, is a written document. And this is the same as what you've seen before that you had to have in writing, same sections, but the issue is in green highlighting that it must be demonstrating consistency with stated purpose, target audience, and scope. And it's the element number 3. So you're going to be ensuring how the program's design is consistent with the purpose of the program, who that target audience is, who is this designed for, and the scope of the program. And then in 4, as well as note 7, we're really addressing alignment, which was throughout the standard already in the 2018 version. So in section 4, not section 4, in the subpoint 4, how you initially ensured and will continue to ensure the alignment of the learning outcomes, the course learning activities, and the summative assessments need to be a part of your design plan. This has just been clarified. And then note 7 contains this aspect of alignment that was sprinkled throughout the 2018 standard in section 6. It's now collected here as part of the instructional design plan. And it says alignment occurs when what's intended to be taught, which are the intended learning outcomes, matches with the learning activities you've designed, and it's appropriately checked during the summative assessment for attainment of those learning outcomes. So if an intended learning outcome specifies a task can be performed, then the learning activity and the summative assessment should have learners perform the task. That would demonstrate alignment. So your responsibility here is not new. It's just clearly put under section 1.2 and is in a note. And further on in section 6, you'll see that we refer to alignment, and it's going to refer to note 7. In 6132, these are the requirements of the standard. Requirements aren't new, but now what's new is in 6132, it must be consistent with who the target population is as well. So the purpose, the scope, and the intended learning outcomes were what you were used to. Now you must make sure that the requirements also are paying attention to consistency with who this whole program is designed for in the first place. And then in this 6134 sub 2, where it talks about ongoing requirements within the certificate term, that's really not a new concept. It's just clarifying that ongoing requirements are prohibited in the standard. You do not have ongoing requirements. So 6134 is about what you can't put in as a requirement. And it's just clarifying that ongoing requirements are only pertinent to whatever you've defined as a certificate term. The note is giving some examples of the kinds of things that are prohibited. We don't do CEUs as a part of 2659 standard. If you have CEUs, then you cannot be accredited under this standard. Things like compliance with the code of conduct. If you violate the code of conduct, then having your credential being revoked, that is not permitted under this standard. So that's not new to you all per se, but it's just clarified here in note 9. Under the sections of course and summative assessment in the 2024 standard, this is just noting that references to alignment were pulled out because they're already in that previous note 7 addressing alignment. So it's just not reiterating it under course and summative assessment. Your alignment, as it pertains to the activities and learning outcomes for the course, are already supposed to be in the instructional design plan. And your alignment with how all that fits with the summative assessment is already part of the instructional design plan, a little bit higher up in section 6. So no, you did not. Did I just hear him say we cannot offer CEUs? Yes, CEUs are not a part of 2659. You can't require them. You can't require them to maintain the credential. So CEUs are not a part of a requirement to get the certificate. You may offer CEUs if people participate in your training as some kind of requirement for something else that they might have for their profession, but you can't include them as a requirement to maintain your certificate. I happened to catch that chat, so I answered that. Okay, 6173, we're almost done with section 6. We'll end up with 7 and then do some Q&A. This is not new. It's just trying to clarify that this standard requires a criterion reference cut score that is empirically justified. So note 11 is giving you some examples of how an empirically justified criterion reference scoring system what it looks like. So it's a numerical score on the assessment, or it could be a scoring rubric, or it could be a checklist of skills with minimum number of those that are to be demonstrated in order to pass. These are the kinds of criterion reference cut scores, and there's some clarity as to how well, perhaps on a scoring rubric, something has to be completed in order to qualify, but there is a cut score, and they could be determined in note 12 by some empirically justified method, which means it's using data, or it could be through some non-empirically justified judgment process. These, of course, can't just be arbitrary judgments. You can't just pull out a cut score that exists outside of your program and then apply it to yourself. Say, oh, well, 70%. A cut score is needed because you need to determine if the test that you built has that correct difficulty level. You could make a test that's harder than a 70%, or one that's easier than 70%. But if there's some legislation that requires that your cut score has to be at 70%, then you do a cut score to make sure that what you built matches that. If you don't have a required cut score due to some legislation, then you do the cut score to see what is the requirement to pass based upon what you built. So these are not new concepts with what the standard said in 2018. They've just included some language to try and help give some examples. Previously, the standard didn't include anything like Note 12, indicating borderline group or contrasting group, etc. And then we're on to the last part of section 6, and this is about program evaluation. There is some new language and some revised language, and things have been flipped a bit. So in 6.1.10.2, the intent of performance targets really is listed here now. That the program evaluation, what you're doing to evaluate your program, needs to include a review of your progress towards those targets. And at a minimum, they have to be some performance target related to your course and to your summative assessment. So you have to be clear about what performance you're targeting for your course, how you're going to go about doing that, and what your target is for the success of the assessment, how you're defining that. And the program evaluation is reviewing. Did you meet it? Did you not? What are you going to do about it? In 6.1.10.3, the performance targets for the course, so it's being specific here, shall be established for, at minimum, looking at learner satisfaction related to the course itself, how it's delivered. And there's a note here for some examples. You could look at course completion rates. You can look at actual answers from the participants on their survey questions, and you want a certain amount of a certain average of agreement with satisfaction, or you want a certain participation rate for your feedback survey. These are all possibilities in the note, but this is new language in 6.1.10.2 and in 6.1.10.3. And then the performance targets for the summative assessment. So the slightly revised wording, and we didn't previously have the term performance targets, but most of you are used to what this is already. At a minimum, there needs to be some performance targets for what is your expectation for the item performance and the form performance. And you need to have, if applicable, some performance target for your evaluators, if there are people who are doing scoring. And you have some performance targets on learning feedback. So there are some examples in the note as to what you could use. These aren't probably new to any of you, but they are just here for clarification. And then in 6.1.10.5, the language that's not highlighted is not new, but monitor and identify regularly the need for changes to the program. That word program means the entire program, not just specific aspects like the purpose, the scope, or the intended learning outcomes. Any changes to the program need to be monitored and identified regularly. And then we just have a couple things in 7, and we'll ask for questions and answers and see what you have in chat. In section 7, 7.1.1.5, all the unhighlighted text you've all seen before, but just to be consistent with the changes you've seen earlier, there are no ongoing requirements during the certificate term. I don't think that's going to change any of your lives, but it's clearer here, and it's consistent with the changes that have been made. And then lastly, in section 7, the order has been reversed to 7121 and 7122. That's not a big deal. But in 7122, this is about if there is a designation or an acronym granted, or both, you don't just have to establish an appropriate system to track, you have to establish and implement that system. This isn't really new, it's just clarifying. And then note 18, if the term is for life for this certificate, then it would be appropriate for an individual to continue to use any associated designation, acronym, mark, logo for life. However, when the certificate has a time-limited term, it would not be appropriate for an individual with an expired certificate to continue to use the designation, acronym, mark, or logo. Might be intuitive that we have already thought about that, but this note has been added for clarification. If the certificate term ended, then any associated designation, acronym, mark, or logo should also end. The use of it should end. Okay. That's the coverage of everything that's changed in 2024 from the previous version 2018. So let's see what questions you have. Let me open this up to Caitlin to cue me in.
Okay.
What do we need
I have
to
a list of questions.
Okay.
We've got, I think, 5 so far. So the first question is from Emily. She says, the standard asks for program objectives to be covered in the program evaluation, but there's no definition for objectives relating to the program itself. So is objective meant to be used synonymously with program goals?
So this kind of depends on what you mean, but it's recognizing that the program itself, in terms of maybe its financial success, is not going to be covered necessarily under program evaluation, but may be an appropriate program objective that would be covered under management review. So they could be a larger set than what is covered and required under Section 6 program evaluation. Those, as you recall, are related to the performance of the items, the form, and specific feedback from the learners. But your management may have other goals for the program that exceed that or are different from those. Those would need to be determined, described in writing, and then evaluated by the program management review. Hopefully that helps. If you have further questions to eliminate that, go ahead and put it in chat. What's the next one?
Emily said, sounds good, thank you. So it sounds like you've answered her question. From Jim, we have, what are the requirements when AI is involved, including documentation, stakeholder disclosure, risk assessment, etc.?
Well, that's a big labyrinth of things. This release of the standard does not go into detail about specific things on AI. However, the principles of confidentiality, the principles related to, the individual program management and the advisory group's involvement with what AI generates doesn't go away just because AI generated it. They still have the responsibility for what AI creates, what AI generates, and they're responsible for all of the aspects of confidentiality and security. But this standard does not specify a lot of the details regarding AI, like, for example, the new 17024 standard does address that some more. That's on certification. But this current standard doesn't go into details. But as long as you're attending to the rest of the standard with what AI generates, there's nothing prohibiting the use of AI.
Okay. Next question is from Ariel regarding clause 5.3.7. Does this include personnel that do not have access to the materials on the assessment, for example, the marketing and sales teams?
So that's a good question. The standard says if they have, and so any employees that are intersecting with the program itself, so if they have any responsibility related to your certificate program, they should have language that they are also going to hold any exposure to the assessment in confidence. Things can happen. There can be accidents where people can get swept into things because of their other responsibilities. So to ensure that the assessment is protected, all personnel who intersect with it need to have that language.
Thank you. We have three left. This is from Isba Ali Farzan. The definition of cut score mentioned both criterion and norm referenced. Here we are limiting to criterion referenced.
Correct. Yes, it's just giving you an illustration to contrast that those are different methodologies, and the norm reference cut score is not a part of what is recognized in this standard. You can use data-driven criterion referenced processes that are already described in the profession. There's nothing prohibiting that, but a norm referenced kind of a forced norm distribution is not appropriate for this standard and would not be accepted.
Thank you. Two left. Laverne says, a performance target for learner feedback on items does not seem to be controllable. I can give them the opportunity to give feedback, but I can't control whether they do.
True, you can't. You can still set performance objectives as to what you would desire to get back, maybe in terms of response rates. For example, some programs, because they want more response and they're not getting more response, decide to create some kind of incentive, or the way that they order things in terms of getting the actual certificate documentation. They may require some kind of feedback to happen. These kinds of things are up to the program, but if you are not getting the kind of responses that you want, then that raises the question for management: is there some alternative? Is there something we can do to help encourage getting that feedback? So that's what the purpose is for that. Not to control their response, but to recognize if you're not getting what you need and you want it, you're deliberately looking at it and deciding what to do about it.
Just a follow-up question from Laverne while we have her. Is that different from overall feedback on the programs? It feels like an extra burden on the participant.
I'm not fine. Which thing is what a more of a burden?
I think requiring feedback for the items as well as overall program feels like an extra burden.
Well, it's common for questions, for example, to be included something like, did you think you got the value for what you paid for this? For example, that might be a more programmatic thing rather than a specific question about the content itself. So it could be handled in a number of ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be some open-ended response. You could craft questions related to it, but it is providing the opportunity for them to give you greater feedback than just on the assessment and just on the content of the course specifically.
Okay. Final question. This is from Muhammad. Can you please provide an example of seeking input from the advisory group for summative assessment security?
So, so some example might be that you're reviewing with the advisory group what the elements are that you're using for security and get their input, their advice on whether there are things they think need to be done for improvement, if they think that that's sufficient, if they have some advice as to additional tools to use or what have you. You're getting instead of just the management view, you're getting the view of those who are a part of your advisory group to address perhaps things that they may be familiar with that they're encountering with security that you may not have thought of. And they're speaking into that to try and help improve how you're keeping this test and its result secure enough that when people take it, that the results are still valid. Okay, let me see if there's...
That's all we got.
Okay. Let me close us out a little bit with some of the promised resources. First of all, Caitlin, who was managing our chat, my colleague, together, we help with 2659. Please feel free to email Caitlin if there are questions related to 2659 in particular. She'll be glad to point you to appropriate resources and help you answer your questions. So write that down, C. O'Connell at anab.org. If you would like a copy of today's slides, and you want a copy of the document we prepared that compares the 2018 standard language to the 2024 standard language, as well as an explanation for those changes, very similar to what I presented today, but you'd like to see it in writing in a table format, please access this QR code or that URL, and that will provide you with access to both things. And if you need to purchase the standard itself, again, here's that QR code to purchase the 2024 standard, because that really is the language that we're using to determine if there is accreditation or not. And so it is really the language you need as a resource when you're completing your preparation of applications and as you're thinking about what the standard requires. And then lastly, this is a reminder, if you wish to participate in the much more comprehensive treatment of the standard itself, it's a 2-day seminar, and it goes in depth to all of these standards that we presented here, but everything else as well. You can use this QR code to get to those links and register, and don't forget that coupon code to give you 20% off. 20E2659 will give you 20% off. Okay, let me stop sharing my screen. If there are additional questions, we'll look and chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for your attention. Hopefully this is helpful to you, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. I'm